glad you could join me in another segment of Wisdom Window. So last week we talked about how area can help us measure a bunch of different things. And depending on the item that you measure, you might need to use square units that are different sizes. For example, we had the 1 square inch. And so I measured an item based on a square inch. Whereas we had other examples where we measured by square foot. And depending on the item, whether it's like your yard or if it's like a book, you're going to use different units to measure the area of those things. So now we're going to expand our knowledge on area and how to measure it using different square units by looking at something called standard units. So now, what is a standard unit? We know what a square unit is, and that's basically 1 unit long, but it's not telling us what kind of unit. The standard units are going to help us explain or understand different types of units that we can use to measure area. There are 2 different types of standard units. We have customary and metric units. A customary unit is a system of measurement commonly used in the United States. And we're going to go over a couple examples of what customary units are. And metric units are one of the systems of measurement introduced into France in the 1790s. And we're going to go over a couple examples of what a metric unit is too. So we have 2 different types of standard units. The first one is the customary units of measurement, and the second one is the metric units of measurement. The customary is originated for the United States, and that is the type of measurement that we use to measure things. And metric units are what like France and other countries inside Europe use to also measure items. So let's look at some examples of what customary units are. So we have examples of an inch, a foot, a yard, and a mile. On the right-hand side of these units, we have the abbreviated form. And then, so we know what a square unit is. A square unit is a 1 unit long square inside our grid, right? Well, these are examples of different sizes of units. Like when we had our inch and our foot. So these are just like those. So those are different ones. So we have our inch, and so we call that square unit a square inch. For a foot, we call it a square foot. For a yard, we call it a square yard. And so a yard, remember, is like those yardsticks that are like this big. And then we have a mile, which is also known as a square mile. Now let's look at some metric units of length. So we have a centimeter, also known as cm for abbreviation, and it is known as a square centimeter. For a meter, or m, we look at square meter. And then we have a kilometer, which is also known as km. And that is also known as square kilometer. Okay, remember when we look at these square units, this is how we measure area. So depending on if you have a square inch or a square mile, you're going to have different units of measurement. They're going to be different sizes. So it's really important to understand what's realistic in measuring different items so you can make those connections between the units and the objects you're measuring. Since we've had some practice with our new vocabulary, now we're going to go to our workbook page and work on some problems using this new information. So I'm going to be on page 14-3 on the practice side, and I'm going to be practicing numbers 1 and 3. And then I'll explain some other problems as well, just to help you along. But this is going to be some fantastic practice for you, so I hope you're practicing. Alright, so let's go practice some problems. Alright, so let's get some practice now with our workbook page. So I'm going to be reviewing numbers 1 and 3. So in order to do this, I think it's really helpful to print out the worksheet or to recreate it using grid paper. But since I printed it out, I can write on it, and I'm going to use this grid to help me understand how to find area. So let's read the directions first. For 1 through 3, count the square units, then write the area. Okay, so I'm just going to underline those two parts so I remember what I need to do. So I need to count the square units, and then I need to write the area. So first I'm going to do this. I'm going to count the square units. And in order to do that, we have two different strategies we can use. We can use the formula. Area, or A, equals length times width, or L times W. So it's up to you if you want to use the count each unit strategy or if you want to use the formula strategy. But since this equation already gives me the units of length and width, I'm just going to plug in those numbers into my problem. So I have area equals the length. Remember, we're reaching out for the length, so my length is 3. Notice there are 3 boxes in height. And then our width is going to be 5 because that is how wide our figure is. So I'm going to add a 5, and then we just multiply 3 times 5, or we can do 5 times 3, whichever works better for you. For this kind of a problem, I like to count by 5s just because I know my 5s times tables better, and then I count on my fingers to count on. So I go 5, 10, 15. So I know that 3 times 5 is 15. And then what are my units? My square units. They're inches. Now, if we referred to our anchor chart on standard units from earlier, we would know that our units in inches is going to change to square inches when we write an answer for area, right? So when we write the area, we can say that I'll write a different color. We have the area equals 15 square inches. Okay? So that's what you're going to do for the rest of these problems. You're going to figure out the square units. You can either use the formula or the counting strategy, which I'm going to use on number 3. And then you're going to write the area on the lines provided. So now I'm going to use the other strategy, or the counting strategy, to figure out the area of this figure. So as you can see, they already have the width and the length labeled, but that's okay. So I'm just going to go in and I'm going to number each of the boxes to count the total number of square units. Okay, if you want, you can count along with me. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So I have a total of 8 square units in this area. But just to check, I'm going to use this formula to check my answer. So we have area equals length times the width. And then I have a length of 2 times a width of 4. And we can also just double 4 since it is multiplying it by 2. Okay, so 2 means it's multiplying it, or it's doubling this number, right? So 4 plus 4 is 8, or 4 times 2 is 8. So my area is 8, and my units are centimeters. Now, if we refer to our standard units chart, we would know that when we find the answer for area, we're going to write it in square units. So here my area equals 8 square, and I'm just going to abbreviate with cm, centimeters. All right. And then, so number 2 is going to be the same as these two problems. You can use one or both of the strategies. We have the counting on or the formula. The formula area equals length times the width. And then for this problem, you're going to do a lot of problem solving. So it's going to ask you to find the area of each student photo. So we have Susie's photo, and then we have Al's photo, and then we have Tom's and Nan's. So you're going to use the grid to help you find the length and the width. You can use either strategy that works best for you to find the area of this figure, for this figure, and this figure. And then you're going to write all those answers here. So they can almost look like this. We can label Susie's as A, Al's is B, Tom's is C, and Nan's is D. And then you can say like figure A equals, and then you can say your unit squared. And you can also work around on this side to show your work. Or you can use a scratch piece of paper like this as well. Or a blank piece of paper to show your work. Whatever works best for you. And then so for like each line, you can just write the answer for each one. All right, and then for this one, it's going to ask you for the area of 2 different pictures. So Sue's and Tom's. So you're going to use the area of Sue's and the area of Tom's. And remember, you can add those 2 together to find that whole area of those 2 photos. However, if this seems a little tricky, I am totally okay with you skipping this question. If you feel like you're ready for the challenge and you want to add the 2 areas up, feel free. But we're not going to learn this until our next video. So if you don't feel ready yet, that is totally okay. And now for this question, it's asking you to find the area of another photo. It's not presented here, but it's also asking you to compare it to Al's, which is right here, and then explain how you know. So you're going to use probably like a grid paper of some type to find out the area of this picture, Colleen's picture, and then compare it to Allie's. Oh, it's Allie. And then you're going to explain your answer using a sentence. If you can show your work, that'll really help you to distinguish which one of those is bigger, because then you can see and compare it to one another, right? All right, cool. And then if we go back to our workbook page, that's 14-3. So we are also going to have a reteach. And in the reteach, it has, like what I have for my poster, I have our customary and our metric units. Remember, customary is used by the US and metric is used by like Europe. And then you can use like the count on method or the formula to solve the area for these guys. And then it's just the same thing. You're just going to write the area in the blanks below. And then here it gives you another opportunity to use that grid paper of yours to solve this. Now, since we've had some time to practice using our new vocabulary for standard units, we used our customary units of length used in the United States. We had the inches, foot, yard, and mile. And we also converted that for our answers in area to using square units. And then we talked about metric units of length, and that's like the centimeter, meter, and kilometer. And we also converted those into square units. Now we know how to use this information to help us solve for area. And now I want you just to think for a minute, what did you learn today about square units? What is something specifically that you learned? Can you tell your mom and dad, parent, guardian? And then I want you to think a little bit deeper. How can you use the customary and metric units to take what we learned inside the classroom beyond? What could you use to measure area for a certain object? Could you use a yard, a mile? What instance would you use those? And I would love it if you could tell me in the comment section so I can see your wonderful ideas. I'm sure you'll have a bunch. Feel free to tell mom and dad and siblings too, because I think they'd be blown away with what you come up with. The next segment, you will have a activity that you can do at home with grid paper to learn more about area. Pretty cool. And as promised, I do have the trivia answer from last time and a new trivia question for you. So our last question was, how many sides does a rhombus have? Did you come up with an answer for it? I have one for you. All right, so a rhombus has 4 sides. Do you remember that? Do you remember learning about that when we learned about polygons? Pretty cool. All right, and now I have a new question for you. And my new question is, how many months of the year have 31 days? All right, so now next time you have to figure out how many months have 31 days. You'll find out the answer in the next segment. Until then, thank you so much for joining me in another wonderful segment. I hope you learned a lot, and I can't wait to see you next time. Until then, bye.